China provides its own solution, if not leadership, about reform and growth, when Europe and the United States are wrestling with the myth of China's role and globalization. Premier Li Keqiang says in his opening speech at the Dalian Summer Davos that dynamics in China's sustainable development comes from a fourth tidal wave of industrialization. Premier Li Keqiang says our urbanization relies on innovation and domestic consumption in the vibrant process of restructuring. He says China's import and export tends to be more balanced. This statement responds to President Trump's complaints that China has manipulated its currency and may have helped avert a trade war between the two largest economies. In the following discussion, we shall examine why President Xi Jinping emphasizes the importance of inclusive co-prosperity. To take a broad look at China's solution and its alleged myth, we are honored to be joined here in the Beijing studio by Stephen Roach, former chairman of Morgan Stanley Asia, and Martin Wolf, who's standing by in London. We're going to have him on satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui.
A meeting of world business leaders. This year's theme of the annual meeting of the new champions is achieving inclusive growth in the fourth industrial revolution. More than 2,000 participants from 80 countries will share their thoughts on how to ensure that more people benefit from a new wave of global growth brought about by advances in technology. Premier Li Keqiang made a speech at the opening of the 11th Summer Davos Forum.
In the world today, in order to promote exclusive growth, we must firmly maintain economic globalization.
Premier Li pointed out that inclusive growth requires efforts from all nations. To better guide economic globalization, Li called on countries to seek good opportunities, boost trade and investment liberalization, and facilitate and pursue development patterns that promote productivity and equality.
In recent years, despite the sluggish world economy, China's economy has been able to maintain steady growth. The important reason was that our growth is getting more and more inclusive.
Summer Davos has become an important forum on science, technology, and innovation, and a key platform for helping to achieve inclusive growth. While China and Europe may be promoting the benefits of globalization, the U.S. under Trump has championed protectionism and America first. Can we still maintain an open, globalized economy when key players would rather build barriers?
Welcome to Dialogue.
Pleasure to be with you.
Premier Li Keqiang says in his opening speech in Dalian that the global economic recovery remains weak. Therefore, we must try to minimize the negative impact of unpredictability. And he tried, obviously, to show up confidence of both consumers and investors who aim at the optimistic vibrancy of the Chinese economy here. Do you buy his idea?
Well, there's no mistaking that we've had a subpar recovery in the global economy for a number of years. The IMF recently raised its forecast a little bit for 2017, 2018, but all we're seeing in the world right now is we're going back to the long-term trend, and that's a forecast. And the IMF's record in making economic forecasts has been one of being overly optimistic for a number of years. So we can't really count on that. But I think we can be a little bit more hopeful in the world than we have been in recent years. And China plays a very, very important part in that stability and improvement of the economy, if that's to be realized.
Mr. Roach, economists are mostly concerned about the facts and figures, curves, bars and pies. What are the statistics that have impressed you most about the Chinese economic performance recently?
Well, I continue to believe in the growth in China is changing in terms of its structure far more rapidly than most people think. The increase in the services share of the GDP from 43% in 2007 to 52% last year is extraordinary by standards of structural change in any economy. At the same time, urbanization is now moved up dramatically to over 55% of the total Chinese population. These two trends are generating a lot more personal income for Chinese consumers. The challenge for the government, though, is to provide incentives to reduce the savings so that new income feeds through more directly into consumer-led growth. There's been some progress there, but not as much as I would like to see.
With regard to domestic consumption, Premier Li Keqiang says in his speech that domestic spending has contributed up to 65% of the GDP, and at the same time, we account for about 30% of the world's economic recovery. What do these figures actually say about the alleged Chinese leadership during the American retreat from center stage, such as TTIP, TPP, or even, NAFTA?
Well, those are sort of maybe two different sides of the same coin. There's no question that China's growth contribution is measured in terms of its percentage of world GDP growth has been very strong. The numbers are pretty clear that over the last 5 years, the world economy would probably have been in recession rather than mild recovery were it not for the vigor of the Chinese economy. And this comes even as China has slowed. But the retreat of the United States, a lot of this at this point is certainly driven by perception, reinforced by America's new president, Donald Trump. But I've learned in listening to Mr. Trump that the winds blow in both directions. His mind, his views change. We can hope that he finds a more temperate way to express his views in the future. I do not see America retreating from its role in the world, although I recognize that he has taken some steps that are worrisome in that regard with respect to TPP, NAFTA, and relations with other major nations or regions, including Europe.
Next year, we're going to witness the 40th anniversary of China's opening up, because the third plenary session of the 11th National Congress of the CPC took place in 1978 under the helmsman of Deng Xiaoping. Now, there is a growing voice in China which currently criticizes what Deng Xiaoping and his opposite have achieved, saying that the economic boom of the Chinese economy has actually encouraged the income discrepancy, and that corruption also plagues the Chinese politics and the society. So these guys who are described by the liberals as left-leaning forces, and their number could be enormous in terms of the size of the population. So what do you think of this critical voice?
I really don't have a lot of patience for it. I think at the end of the 1970s, the Chinese economy was in very bad shape. It needed a new recipe for economic growth. Reforms and opening up, as articulated by Deng Xiaoping, provided China with a quick and powerful burst of investment and export-led growth that has produced tremendous results in terms of lifting the per capita income of the world's most populous nation by 30-fold since the late 1970s. But it was not the final answer for China. It was a jump start for the Chinese economy, and former Premier Wen Jiabao, back in 2007, warned of a Chinese economy that was becoming increasingly unstable, unbalanced, uncoordinated, and ultimately unsustainable. And that has sparked a big debate that has really changed the dynamic of China, rebalancing it more toward services-led consumer growth. And that's healthy and definitely an important follow-up from the initial burst of growth sparked by Deng Xiaoping.
Both the EU and the United States refused to grant China the long-awaited market economic status, citing perhaps the formidable presence of the state-owned enterprises as one major reason. Now, China says, look, we do not follow the neoliberal economic order, encouraging shock therapy and privatizing all the segments of the Chinese economy. Instead, the SOE would still count as much as it could under the leadership of the Communist Party. This has been very controversial for Western observers who are very skeptical about the vibrancy of the Chinese economy, whether it's going to be sustainable or not. Now, looking forward, what do you think of the Chinese uniqueness in sustaining its dynamics? Li Yifu also turns out to be a fan of this media ownership.
Look, there's no one template that or one size that fits all for economies, and we in the West can't dictate the terms of engagement for the Chinese economy, just like the Chinese model is not appropriate for nations in the West or maybe even other nations in the East. There certainly is a healthy debate that continues to rage in China about the role and the power of state-owned enterprises. And I think if there's one area of disappointment for me in the reforms that have followed in the aftermath of the third plenum of 2013, it's the lack of momentum on state-owned enterprise reform. I would like to have seen more progress in that regard. In the same sense, there's a dynamic, rapidly growing, innovations-driven private sector that I think is widely unappreciated, and that, if anything, is providing much more dynamism to the Chinese economy today than the state-owned enterprise sector is.
Do you think a trade war has been narrowly averted between the United States and China, given the fact that China agreed to draft a 100-day plan to assist the U.S. reindustrialization after the Mar-a-Lago summit in Florida? And President Trump will meet with his Chinese counterpart on the sidelines of the Hamburg G20 summit in early July. What's going to happen next between the two largest economies?
I don't think the 100-day plan is resolved the long festering tensions that have been evident between U.S. politicians and the Chinese leadership. The Mar-a-Lago meeting was a very constructive development between President Trump and Xi Jinping, but the one thing that I've learned is that Mr. Trump is not very consistent in his messages. So how he feels one day is not necessarily an indication of how he feels the next day. Should new problems arise for the United States, either the economy or in sort of global geopolitical realm, he could change his mind on China, and I think it's going to take more than this quick fix of a 100-day trade deal to alter that. We need to see more deep-rooted, solid engagement, like a bilateral investment treaty and other types of engagement to give me greater confidence in the future.
Thank you so much. Let me go to Martin Wolf, who's standing by in London on satellite. Hello, Martin.
Hello.
Today, observers at home and abroad are following debates raging across the world as to whether China stands ready to assume world economic leadership during the U.S. retreat. However, one very important prerequisite for China to allegedly assume the leadership, quote unquote, would depend on, for example, the sustainability of the Chinese economy. Now, Premier Li Keqiang said at the opening ceremony of the Dalian Summer Davos that the unpredictability of the world economic recovery requires China's economic performance to be as stable as it could. Now, what's your take about the potential and vibrancy of the Chinese economy at this moment?
That's a rather complicated question. Well, first of all, I hope that Premier Li Keqiang is correct and that China will sustain stable growth. It would be extremely important for the world economy that it should do so. My own view is that in the short to medium run, that is over the next few years. It should be possible to sustain growth in China because the policymakers control pretty well all the relevant levers. They can generate more credit and debt if they need to. They control foreign exchange reasonably well, so they can avoid any excessive movement in the currency. They can encourage investment spending pretty easily. So the levers are in their control. However, I also think there are underlying stresses in the Chinese economic system which are building up slowly over time, particularly the very rapid rises in debt and the what I consider to be an excessively high level of and partly wasteful investment. But I think those are long-term challenges, not challenges that will threaten Chinese growth in the short to medium term.
Most of the time, throughout the opening speech, Premier Li Keqiang seemed to deliver a rosy picture and very promising signals about the sustainability of the Chinese economy, particularly the robust performance of our economy in the first 2 quarters of 2017. Now, at the same time, one recent editorial of Global Times, one very influential, alleged influential tabloid version of People's Daily, said recently, the outbound flight of the Chinese capital may have delivered yet another conflicting view or signal that consumers, particularly investors, are not very confident about the potential and future of the Chinese market. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, obviously, I would expect the Premier, like any other leader of any country in the world, to insist on how strong the economy is. So he's doing his job, and that's the job we expect policymakers to perform, to be optimistic. Yes, it's clear that one of the things that is going on in China is that as credit and debt rises, financial assets rise in China. People want to diversify their holdings of assets globally. They probably do feel that there's somewhat of a shortage of investment opportunities in China relative to their wealth and their savings, their financial assets and their flow of savings. So they want to get their money out. Probably the anti-corruption program has also played some role in encouraging people to try and take their money out. All of this, in a way, can be seen as perfectly normal. China has now got to the level of development with a gigantic stock of wealth and of flow of savings at which people do want to hold foreign assets. So you could see this as perfectly normal, but I also think there are some aspects of this that look like flight, as you've indicated.
Thank you so much. You are watching a discussion with Stephen Roach and Martin Wolf about the shape of the Chinese economy for the first 2 quarters of 2017, as well as whether China is ready to assume world economic leadership in the broad context of a very controversial globalization. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. Now, Stephen, in the process of restructuring the Chinese economy and upgrading it, China is promoting the inclusive growth in the fourth industrial revolution, which brings together digital, physical, and biological or drastic changes. Now, how do we get it and implement it at the scale we need?
Well, it's a great word. It's a great concept. I think, to me, it's emblematic of China that has recognized the need to come up with a different formula for economic growth in an era of rapid technological change, and the need to combine that technological change, which typically tends to be labor saving and capital intensive, with more employment. That's very difficult to do, and so the the so-called fourth wave definitely adds a piece of labor-intensive growth in services to the equation. And I think...
But first of all, what does the fourth industrial revolution actually mean for you in the Chinese context? Well, what's going to happen next in the Chinese market?
Well, I think it's just another phase, another step in a progression of an economy that started off, in the late 1970s, early 1980s, with very little in the way of viable economic activity, focused on a manufacturing-led investment and export-led recovery, and then has slowly begun to move up the frontier of capital accumulation, knowledge accumulation, and innovation-based growth. And this fourth wave rounds out the picture, and that together with, as you indicate, continued push on urbanization offers China a framework, a vision to keep the growth miracle alive. You got to be careful though before you get caught up in all these fancy terms, and make certain that you don't lose focus of the hard work that needs to be done in the domestic economy.
Mr. Wolf, it seems a trade
Yes.
war has been narrowly averted between the United States and China after some of the phone calls between President Trump and his Chinese counterpart, particularly after the Mar-a-Lago summit. Now, many here in China are still cautiously optimistic about what can be done between the United States and China to promote the co-prosperity other than the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, Jay, the powerful presentation in Detroit, delivering on his promise to create up to 1 million jobs. On the other hand, what do you think of the prospects of having a tax break of up to 15% to attract manufacturing sectors back from emerging markets to the United States and help assist the industrialization of the U.S. economy?
Well, tax reform is obviously one of the issues that is now being discussed in the US Congress. The sort of tax rate you mention would be very problematic because it will, I think, lose them a lot of revenue. And it's not quite clear how they're going to offset that, how exactly they're going to handle that within the tax reform package. As I'm sure you know, they're focusing at the moment entirely on healthcare, and only then is it likely that they will get to the tax reform side. But I honestly don't think that lowering the tax rate on the corporation will contribute anything significant to the reindustrialization of America. It might well promote investment to some degree, but the promise that Mr. Trump is essentially elected on, that industrial jobs will return to the United States in a sufficient way to start re-employing the people who lost their jobs, is a false promise. It's not going to happen. And whether he will get away with that inability to deliver on that, I don't know. It seems that he can get away with almost anything vis-a-vis his supporters, his base. But the cut in the tax rate get some of the capital back into America, though even that is debatable given that they can borrow the money at home, but it's not going to reindustrialize America.
One of the major obstacles that get in the way of alluring both the capital and jobs back to the U.S. market is the much higher labor costs in the United States. However, on the other hand, this drawback may be offset by, for example, both the tax break as well as the shale gas and the low price of that. What do you think of the feasibility? Are you optimistic?
Well, higher wages in America or in developed countries broadly are a reflection of higher average productivity. The countries are richer, so they pay higher wages. And that's the aim of development. The aim of development is to make labor more expensive, to raise wages. Our problem is that they are not the rise has slowed. Now, that means, of course, that the comparative advantage of countries with relatively high labor costs are different from those of countries with relatively low labor costs. So America has to specialize in international trade in high skill activities in which the costs are offset by the skills of the workforce. That's obvious. My own view is that as a result of that, unskilled labor intensive activities disappear inevitably from the bundle of tradable goods produced by rich countries. There's no way that we're going to employ relatively less skilled people in producing tradables, goods or services. They're going to be producing non-tradables. Fortunately, there are lots of non-tradables. There's a big question about the wages at which they're going to work. But again, we have to accept the basic logic of trade, which is countries with high wages, because they've got higher average productivity, and the gap between the US and China is still at least 3 to 1 properly measured. These are not countries that are going to be competitive in low skilled activities in the world. That's just, there's no future for that.
Both Brexit and the campaign success of President Trump occurred on the platform of the rise of populism and the trade protectionism sort of, and therefore there is a very impressive article which has generated a lot of attention in front page stories in recent days, that liberal democracy is in retreat. Hence the theme of the Munich Security Conference addressed the issue and theme of a post-West, post-truth world economic order or even political order. In this regard, what do you think of such allegation and its impact upon the world economic order, in which the emergence of developing countries such as India and China would contribute more to the world economic recovery?
The numbers are clear. But before the financial crisis, for maybe the 20 years before the financial crisis, the developing economies accounted for about 40% of the world GDP, and the developed world is 60%. By the end of this year, the numbers are reversed. 40% for the developed economies, 60% for developing. So the dynamism is there. Some of this because of the convergence of the developing world to the frontiers of economic advancement in the rich developed economies. But the question is, where do we go from here? Does the divergence continue to widen out? I think it will for a while, but I think it will then stabilize. We can call that the new global normal. China has its own new normal, but there certainly has been a significant realignment between developing and developed economies.
Thank you so much, Martin and Stephen. Thanks a lot. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue. Until next time, goodbye.